For those of you guys that are brand new, welcome. What I'm going to cover here over the next 60 minutes, let's say, is a history of money, where money started, where is it today, and the possibilities of where it's going to be tomorrow. No one knows for sure exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. We can only base our ideas of what we believe based on how far back in the past we go and how we look at trends and how we see the cycles work. Nothing on this presentation except for maybe a couple of smart aleck remarks are created by me. This is a bunch of information that I've gathered over the last probably 12 to 15,000 hours of study over the last dozen years. I have probably put in several hours a day on an average. So it's been, there's some days where maybe I put in way too much. But it's exciting to learn about this stuff. And if I can compile it into a small little presentation that I can help you so you can go out and change your life, that's my goal. Nothing on here is going to be investment advice. I will tell you what I will do, what I am doing, but I would never suggest for you to do anything that I'm doing. You need to find out what you need to do for yourselves. And so let's get started. So the evolution of money. And by the way, over the years, I have gathered a lot of information from a lot of very smart people. And one of the guys that I like to follow is a gentleman. Let's see, where is that? Okay, there it is. Is a gentleman by the name of Mike Maloney. And he's got some great videos on the hidden secrets of money. I highly recommend it. He's got about a dozen videos or something like that. And he's got a lot of wisdom and a lot of research. And I have followed this guy since '09 when I read his book on gold and silver. And he worked with Robert Kiyosaki, and they used to travel around and do a lot of talks on this. So if you're familiar with Robert Kiyosaki, you kind of know the audience. So let's talk a little bit about the 7 stages of empire. And what I'll do is I'll eliminate my little square there, so that might be more helpful in seeing. So the first stage of empire is sound money. Countries start out with sound money, gold and silver, or backed by gold and silver, either one. And just so you know, I'm going to run through these real fast. Don't think you got to learn them all. And then I'm going to go through some things, and I'm going to come back to this slide again at the end so you understand more about what I'm saying now. The number 2 of the layers of public works and infrastructures, building, parks, transportation. As it develops economically, it begins to take on more and more economic burdens, adding layers upon layers of public works. The third phase, massive military and social programs. It says, as the economic wealth grows, so does the political influence, social programs, and its military. See, the social programs are always a good idea, you guys. After the Second World War, we had the New Deal, chicken in every pot, car in every driveway, or 2 chickens in every pot, couple cars in every, and those ideas are fantastic. But the problem is you have to ask yourself, who's going to pay for it? And it's awful funny that when that question is asked, everybody gets real quiet. So let's go on a little bit. The 4th stage of empire is war. Eventually it puts its military to use and expenditures explode. Number 5, currency debasement. That means the value of your wealth is disappearing. We'll go through this as I'm going through it. Debasement and pay for wars and social programs. To fund the war, it steals the wealth of its people by debasing their coinage with base metals or by replacing their money with currency that can be created in unlimited qualities. That's what they did in 1960s, 64 being the last year, is we actually had silver in our currency. And from 65 on, they replaced it with base metals, and they took the true wealth out of there. And so we'll go into that a little bit. Number 6, the loss of faith in the currency. So the loss of faith, the loss of purchasing power of the expanded currency supply is sensed by the population and the financial markets, triggering a loss of faith in the currency. Sounding familiar now. And number 7, the last one, currency crisis. Gold accounts for fiat currency. Fiat is Latin for let it be, as I say, or it's because I say so kind of a thing. It sounds like something kings and emperors and government would say. Fiat currency. A mass movement of currency into precious metals and other tangible assets take place. The currency collapse of says the currency collapses and gold and silver rise in price as they account for a huge quantity of currency that was created. We'll get to this one at the end especially. This process transfers massive wealth to those who had the foresight to position themselves beforehand in real money, which was gold and silver. So let's go into the first part here. Gold has been money for about 5,000 years. And when I say gold, I mean gold and silver. And if you look at this chart right here, going back to the 1400s and the 1500s, Portugal was the dominant currency in the world. And it was because their currency was used most in the world at that time. It wasn't a world reserve currency, it was just a dominant currency. Spain took over between the 1500s and 1600s. The Netherlands stepped in between the 16 and 1700s. France between the 1700s and 1800s. When we got into Great Britain, we got into a reserve currency between the 1800s and 1900s, and the United States was the world reserve currency from 1944 to present date. And so you see what happens is these currencies in here, they never last. The gold and silver have lasted for 5,000 years. When we look at our currency today, we say the dollar's always been around, it's always going to be around. And it's because in our lifetime, that short span that we call our lifetime, that's been the case. But what happens if you were to give currencies a name, like the dollar starts with a D, and yuan starts with a Y. If you took all the currencies that have ever existed from A to Z, you wouldn't get past the end of B before you would already reach over 600 currencies that are no longer around anymore. Currencies, the one thing for sure is currencies will never last. And so since the mid 1800s, most of the civilized world, or what they referred to as the civilized world, which was major countries, were anchored to gold and silver. So let's get into what is money and what is currency. Currency is a unit of account. It means there's numbers on it. We can keep track. A medium of exchange. I want that, you want this, let's swap, but there's something of value. It is portable. It is durable or somewhat durable. It is divisible, which means 2 $5 bills is equal to one $10 bill. It is fungible, which means that my $1 is just as valuable as your $1 bill in your pocket. And so that's what currency is. And what is money? Money is all those things, and it is also a store of value. See, gold and silver truly are wealth. It is something that is valued. It's a miraculous metal. You could take gold and pound down 1 ounce of gold into a 10-foot by 10-foot square. It is amazing the things that we can do with the precious metals. As for fiat currency, a dollar bill is whatever you could do with a piece of paper. You know, put some tobacco in there and smoke it, or light a fire. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot of value that there is in fiat currency outside of using it as a medium of exchange. Now, let's talk a little bit about how this process kind of works. I want you to go back gazillion years back in time, and what would happen is they used all kinds of things over the years. They've tried to come up with different types of money. And it ended up being currency because it never did store value. They would put it in livestock. And in livestock, what they would do is maybe their animals, maybe their chickens would get a disease and die, and there goes all their wealth. That doesn't work. Maybe they would put them into metal cauldrons, big metal pipe or pots, but those would eventually rust. They tried whale bones. They've tried all kinds of beads. They've done all kinds of things over the years, and it's always been gold and silver. So here's what would happen. Let's say I wanted to buy a metal cauldron from you, and I wanted to give you a few little pieces of silver or gold or whatever for that big metal pot. And I would give it to you and take it. Well, it wasn't practical to carry your gold and silver around with you forever. You could lose it. Someone could knock you on the head and steal it. It got heavy. If you were one of the fortunate ones, it was really heavy. Well, what they did over time is they learned, I will take my gold and silver and protect it. I would take it to the goldsmith. The goldsmith would guarantee that he would take care of it, and he would give me some of these receipts, and I'd take them home. I'd keep my receipts hid, and I'd only have a few receipts with me at any given time. And if I wanted to buy something, I would take a few of those receipts I had in my pocket to the goldsmith, and the goldsmith would give me some gold. I'd run to the person that was going to sell me the metal pot, and I would give him the gold. They would give me the metal pot, then they would take the gold to the goldsmith, and the goldsmith would give them receipts. Long process. It didn't take long before the people realized that I could just give you a few of my receipts, which leads to those things in your wallets and in your purses that we refer to as money, which is not money. It is currency. It is a receipt of money being stored for you somewhere else, or at least it's supposed to be. We're going to get to that. Now what happens in the village, everybody's trading these receipts back and forth, and everybody's happy, and the goldsmith realizes, hey, look, I got 100 pieces of gold, or 1,000 pieces of gold. I sold 1,000 receipts out there to the people. I got new people coming into town all the time. No one's asking for their gold anymore. I think what I'll do is I'll print up another 1,000 receipts. And he starts to sell these receipts. And now what's happened is he's got 2,000 receipts out there, and he's only got 1,000 pieces of gold. What's happened is he's devalued the currency, or the money, the true money in the village. That the people thought that they had so much wealth, but half of their wealth was stolen from them, and they had no clue. Because when those 2,000 receipts come back for their gold, they're only going to get a half a piece of gold each. And that's just the way it works out. That's what we refer to as inflation. A lot of you on this call, just like me, heard that inflation is when products and services go up. That's an inflationary economy, but it's not inflation. Inflation is when you increase the currency supply, which devalues the net worth of the people. See, when we are taught that inflation is prices going up, we're taught that by the people that cause our prices to go up. And so what happens, if you're the one that's printing currency and making prices go up, then you cleverly leave out the first part about how you did it, and you just teach everybody that inflation is when products and services go up. So let's talk about that for a moment. I want you to imagine there's a little puddle of water on your desk or your countertop right now, and we'll say that that is currency. Then I want you to take up a little tiny sponge that's all dry, and you put it in that little puddle of water or whatever, and watch the sponge expand. And that's what happens. If you pour more water, the sponge soaks up more and it gets bigger. The more currency, the bigger the prices. Let's go into something a little bit more practical. Let's say for a moment that there was something that I've always wanted, and I've been looking for it everywhere, but all I've got is $5 to my name. And I walk into a store and I see it and I go, there it is, I've been wanting one for years. And I look at the price, hey, it's $5. I got $5. But then I start to process the information. You know, I'm going to be broke if I spend my last $5. I know I really want this. No, I'm not going to do it. And what happens is the store owner realizes these things aren't moving, and so therefore he lowers his prices. But I want you to imagine for a moment that you can put digits in a computer like government does and increase the monetary base and increase the currency supply, and you can do it as much as you want anytime you want. That would be as if I walked into the store now and I opened my wallet and there was $100 in there now. Heck yeah, I'm going to get it. As a matter of fact, give me 3 of them. They're cheap. I'll take a blue one, a red one, and a green one. And now what the store owner says is, man, these things are flying off the shelf. I'm going to raise my prices. When inflation happens, when the currency supply is expanded, the natural result of that is the price of the products will go up. And there's another step. Now that we understand what inflation is, now that we understand what the goldsmith did and how he was able to steal the wealth of the people, there's one more disconnect. And that's when the goldsmith finally says, nobody's using gold anymore. Gold is no longer money. By fiat, I declare that those receipts are now money. And you guys will all use that from now on. And since you don't need this gold, I'll be taking it somewhere else. Have a nice life. Well, if that happened, you'd say thief. And yet that's what happened to us. Let's walk through history a little bit here. Let's go back to the Second World War. The whole world was involved in this war from the late 30s. The United States was invited a little late to the party at Pearl Harbor in 41. We jumped on board, but what we were doing beforehand and during that process is we were manufacturing for the rest of the world. The rest of the world was at war. We were shipping products to our allies. And what they were doing is they were sending us their gold. And it got to the point where the United States accumulated over 20,000 tons of gold, or somewhere close to 70% of all of the world's wealth. And so towards the end of the Second World War, just before the end, around 1944, 730 delegates from 44 nations, allied nations, got together in New Hampshire at a resort, Bretton Woods, and they says, we have to figure out a world currency. We've got to determine some type of a receipt because we can't be shipping our gold back and forth across the ocean. Well, what they determined in 1944 was, since the United States had most of the world's wealth, that they would now be the reserve currency for the world. Another organization was developed at the time called the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And what the IMF would do is they would help out some of the neighboring countries that were getting into trouble. That the different countries would put a little bit in to a pot, and they would give them an IOU. These countries would give them an IOU, and they would help them out to get back on their feet. And so that was the start of the IMF. Do you know what happens anytime you set up any type of government organizations? Once they're started up, they never want to end. Self-preservation. I've got to live. I've got to live, even if they're not needed. Let's fast forward to 1971. Between 1944 and 1971, the United States, through exporting, and because of world war or wars that were happening after that, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the space race, going to the moon, and all this, we started to print more receipts than there was money. Well, you know what happens when that happens. Well, eventually what happened is some of the countries started to catch on. Countries like France were not happy about it. and countries started to ask for their currency back. The United States went from 20,000 tons of gold down to about 8,300 tons of gold. Today we supposedly have 8,100, something like that. And so what happened at the time, we tried doing different things to be able to fix it. Other countries were getting into trouble as well. And finally, Richard Nixon came out, and on television, he took us off the gold standard. It was just like the goldsmith saying, you no longer need gold anymore. It is not money. Fiat, I declare by fiat that this dollar bill is now money for the world. And that's what happened in 1971. The IMF was basically, should have been mothballed and actually eliminated at the time, but self-preservation hung on as long as it could. It wasn't until the 80s that Ronald Reagan actually started to use the IMF for some other things. But the IMF is trying to stay in power even to this day. So let's continue with 1971, 72, 73. What happened was that if the US dollar was no longer anchored to gold, why should we continue to use the dollar as a world currency? I mean, we'll use something else. I don't need you to continue to print more receipts and devalue my wealth. So here's what Richard Nixon did. He sent over his Secretary of State, a guy by the name of Henry Kissinger, over to Saudi Arabia. And he told Saudi Arabia, he says, here's the deal. We will use our military might of the United States of America, and we will protect your oil fields from your enemy. In Saudi Arabia, I can imagine what they said. They probably said this: who do we need to kill to have this deal done? This is the greatest deal in the world. You're talking anybody, including Israel. They said anybody. But here's what you do. You are not to sell oil to anybody on planet Earth unless they buy it with US dollars. And then you take your profit and you reinvest it into the United States. They said, done. That's what we refer to today as the petrodollar. A lot of us on this call have heard the term the petrodollar, but it wasn't in 2016 with the Freedom of Information Act that we found out what the petrodollar truly was and how it was all set up. So basically what this did is it forced the world to stay now not on the gold standard, but the dollar standard. Otherwise, they could not get oil because it didn't take long before the rest of the OPEC countries agreed that's the best deal going, and nobody could get oil unless they bought it with dollars. So let's move on. 1971. Now let's move forward. So the world's just moving along, and we're going into the late 90s, and we're starting to go into the dot-com bubble. Because remember, after all, the public had access to the internet around 94, 95. You know, you start getting the AOL, and you could buy flowers online. I used to think, well, that's a dumb idea. Why in the world would I buy flowers and have to wait several days or a week or 2 weeks to get them when I go down the street to get them? And I just didn't understand. But the world was headed that way, as we know today as the internet. 1998, these companies were popping up all over the place. 99, the dot-com bubble was exploding. Hedge funds got in trouble, and when the bubble popped, Wall Street had to bail out the hedge funds. Alan Greenspan, who was the Fed chair at the time, he dropped interest rates to a low level, and he left them there too long. Now, what does that mean? With interest rates lower, people could borrow money at a cheaper rate to stimulate the economy to keep going and to get us out of that recession that we were in. But because he left it there too long, he overshot it, and that's what led to the housing bubble of 2008. We're going to get into the real reasons that kind of pop these bubbles, but for now, I'm going to just hit the highlights. So now Wall Street bailed out the hedge funds in 98, but now Wall Street's in trouble. So the Federal Reserve has to step in 2008 and bail out Wall Street. And now it's not just a stock market bubble, it's a stock market bubble and a housing bubble. And the base currency of the United States at the time was 825 billion, let's call them receipts. The Federal Reserve has two weapons during a time of recession. They drop interest rates and they print more currency. Normally what happens is interest rates are low currency is low and interest rates are high. And during a recession, they drop the interest rates and they pump up and they switch spots. And that's kind of what happens. And then you've got another 10 years to get rid of the base currency. What happens is the feds print up more currency. They buy all these bonds. When the bonds expire, they don't renew these bonds. They destroy the currency and the base currency comes down. And as soon as they can, they creep up interest rates without destroying the economy and slowing it down. They try to find a sweet spot. And so in 08, what they did is within a few years, they 5 times the receipts. They went from 825 billion to 4.2 trillion dollars in currency. Unbelievable. So let me show you what happens. The housing market was in a disaster because it was overshot, overextended, and it needed to come down and get stabilized in a good place. But when you're the federal government and you're trying to keep the economy going and stimulate, it's more, and it's more debt, more debt, more debt, more debt. And what happens is it's working on a cancer patient, and they think having a Spider-Man Band-Aid is going to help it. You cannot cure cancer with a Spider-Man Band-Aid, but that's what they tried to do. So in 08, when the housing market started to collapse, now at the time, a guy by the name of Ben Bernanke, who was the new Fed chair, dropped interest rates all the way down just a hair above zero. Never in the history of the United States has this ever happened. And he printed 5 times the receipts. Never has this happened. And not only did he print it, but he took $1.2 trillion and bought up the mortgages in the US to try to take the supply out so the demand would stay high to stimulate the housing market. And it worked for a little bit until 2010. And then it started to go down again. He left interest rates at zero, put another $800 billion into these mortgages, $2 trillion. You got to remember, when this started here just before 08, there was only 825 billion. We got 2 trillion and just bailing out the houses. And we're going to get to the reason why in a minute. And they left it at zero, and it got it just to start coming up. And it's been creeping up and creeping up. And then it started taking off again. And we're coming up to 2020. The problem has not been fixed. The cancer had to be operated on and taken out. And all they did was kick the can down the road and created a bigger problem later. They're expecting this next drop to be anywhere from 50 to 70% in the housing market. All right, let's get into what happened with the stock market at the time. The Dow Jones. So the Dow Jones, we'll go back to the Great Depression, September of 1929, from September 1929 to July 1932. That's about 34 months or something like that. The stock market, the Dow Jones, went from 386, sounds small compared to today's standards, and it dropped within 34 months down to 40.56. And it lost almost 90% of the worth of the Dow Jones. It was crazy. It had what you call dead cat bounces. Imagine a dead cat falling and bounce, and then falling further and bounce, and falling further and bounce. Now, I know some of you are freaked out because I talk about cats and death. Get over it. stay focused on the point here. It's not about cats. It's just what they call it, right? So what the Great Depression had was 7 dead cat bounces all the way down until July of 1932. So here's how this works. When the stock market first did its drop in October, or was it September? Anyways, one of those two. I think it was September, actually. When it did its first drop, a lot of people lost a lot of money, but then it crept back up again. And as it crept back up, a lot of people that lost a lot of money said, I've got some of it back. I got to sell because I believe this thing's going south. But that's not what everybody did. They said in 1929, they believe even more money was lost because they thought as it first hit bottom and came up, the people thought it was a recovery and they were going to buy the dip. And what happened is it dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped. And that's where fortunes were lost. Matter of fact, there's a saying from Groucho Marx. He was 39 years old and he had made a lot of money in the movies. And he lost $250,000 in 1929. I mean, that's a lot of money today. It's not crazy huge compared to what is out there. But in 1929, and he made a joke about it. He said, I would have lost more, but that was everything I had. Later on, he got his fortune back because he continued to do movies. But man, a lot of people weren't so fortunate. And so that's what happened in that time. What spurred on the stock market is you had a depression in 1920. A lot of people don't realize it was a depression. It went into stimulated economy, and we had the roaring 20s. But what started this doesn't just start when the stock market drops. Florida had some issues. That had a hurricane in Miami in 1926. It had another one in 1928. They had the Mediterranean fruit fly that came into Florida. They had to quarantine the state. They had 50% of the revenue of the state came from their citrus, and that market was shot. And that state was already in a hyper housing bubble as it was, and it started to impact. That with little things all over the country were the pin that popped the bubble. Let's fast forward to a time you're familiar with. October of 2007, they referred to the housing or the Great Recession. What happened at the time were politicians were getting on the floor in Congress and they were saying, shame on you, rich people. Shame on you for not letting poor people own their own house. Now, the problem with that is how are they going to pay for it? They still have the 2 chickens in every pot mentality, but they won't ask who's going to pay for it. You want to fix this mess we're in, we need to stop asking for stuff we can't afford. So what they did is they did these weird subprime loans and leveraged all these different ways that anybody and everybody can get a house. And what ended up happening is the housing market peaked in 06 and people couldn't make their payments and the houses started coming down in 07 and then boom. 08 was a disaster, 09 was a disaster. And so the subprimes were the start of the pinprick that would cause that economy that was doing really well to eventually crash. The government interfered and they didn't let things take its own natural course. So here we are, February of 2020, just a few months ago. The stock market, and by the way, the stock market back in 08, from 07 to 09, dropped from 14,000 down to 6,600. So the Great Depression almost dropped 90%. The Great Recession dropped about 47%, and it had 3 dead cat bounces. Boom, boom, boom. So February, 3 months ago, we watched the Dow dropped from almost 30,000 to under 19,000. It dropped 37% in 1 month. And then what happened? People said, but the economy was great. The economy is always great until it's not. And then the truth is revealed. The roaring 20s, they thought everything was great. COVID-19 was the pin that popped the bubble. It could have been anything. It could have been hurricanes in Florida. Could have been anything that popped this bubble. It's no longer a stock market bubble and a housing bubble. It is a debt bubble, a real estate bubble. It is a automobile. It's a debt crisis. They're calling it an almost everything bubble. And it's not just the US. The world is in a giant bubble bath and enjoying themselves because they think everything is awesome. February, we experienced our first dip of a dead count bath or a dead cat bounce, a lot of people believe. And if history is anywhere close to what it's been in the past, a lot of people believe we're going into a depression, not a recession. And some believe it'll be worse than the one in 1929. A lot of people believe that the Dow will drop down to about 8 to 10,000. And they say, how could that be? Well, look at history. So let's go into what's going on right now. 2020, the Federal Reserve is now in trouble. So let's go back. Hedge funds had to be bailed out by Wall Street. Wall Street had to be bailed out by the Federal Reserve. Who's going to bail out the Federal Reserve? Are they expecting God to come down and save the Federal Reserve? Somebody is delusional in thinking that debt goes away. Debt never goes away ever until it's settled. And it hasn't been settled by putting Superman Band-Aids on cancer. So COVID-19 was the pin. Billionaires like Sam Zell back in 2007 sold $40 billion in real estate just before the crash. And Sam Zell and a lot of other billionaires over the last few years have sold off billions of dollars in real estate again. Countries like Venezuela and Zimbabwe, these countries that are in hyperinflation right now, where their dollars are laying or their currency are laying in the street. My dad told me a story years ago when I was a small child. He said, Kurt, there'll be a day where you'll have a wheelbarrow full of money and someone's going to steal it. I said, who's going to steal my money, Dad? He said, they're not going to steal your money. They're going to dump the money out. They're going to steal your wheelbarrow. See, when you're in hyperinflation, the currency is worthless, and real things like wheelbarrows become important. You know what a lot of billionaires are doing right now? They're buying agricultural. They're buying big pieces of property, and they're getting farms on it. Eastern countries right now, Russia, China, India, these different Eastern countries right now are accumulating gold and silver over the last 11 years. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is they're building the old silk lines going from Shanghai all through Asia into Eastern Europe to Moscow. They figure they can trade with a good portion, maybe half of the world, on some type of a gold standard again. All the countries of the world now are trying to figure out how to develop some type of a real money supply again. Because of the debt so high. We're in a debt bubble. It's so crazy. The base currency now, it's already close to 7 trillion. They're talking about printing another 7 or another 3 trillion more. By the time this is done, if we're under 20 trillion, I will be surprised. Interest rates are down to 0. They're talking about negative interest rates. Banks right now are loaning out money to people, and they're getting paid income on that. And then as people put money in their banks, that becomes a liability to them because every month they got to pay those people interest on that. But how does it work in a negative economy? We've never been here. And yet a quarter of the world's on negative interest rates now. Unprecedented. We've never seen this. The danger signs are flashing everywhere, but we're taking a bubble bath. So now what happens is as banks take money in and they got to pay interest on it, and a negative interest rate, they don't have to pay interest on it. So no longer is that going to be in the liability. It's going to be in their asset column. And why should a bank have to lend any money out? I'll just sit here and take deposits. And the petrodollar, we're getting weaker and weaker. Now we know that oil just took a dip here about a month or so ago, and it was because of battle between Russia and Saudi Arabia. And these guys got into this major argument. Saudi Arabia said, heck with you then. We're going to flood the market and put all kinds of oil out there until the oil dropped down. And in some parts, we're selling for negative. They were paying people to take it. And finally, Donald Trump came in, and this was on the 2nd of April, told Saudi Arabia that if they didn't lower their production because they were throwing the whole world into a tailspin, that the United States land, sea, and air was going to pull out within 30 days and leave them naked in the desert for their enemies to come in anytime they want. It's amazing how Saudi Arabia said, all right. But the U.S. is losing their leverage to the world. The world's getting tired of the U.S. bossing them around. They're getting tired of sanctions put on them. Pensions. Shall we talk about pensions and the trillions of dollars that are not going to be there for people? See, early on, as you go into the workforce and we're younger, we're supposed to put some into a savings account, some into bonds, and we're told to put a lot in the stock market. And then as we get older, we have a more secure package, and we put more into bonds, less in the stock market, and a little in savings. But what's happening is people were promised 8% a year. They're not getting it. So they're getting more aggressive, and they're putting more and more of their portfolios into the stock market. What's happening to the stock market? A lot of people lost their tails in 2008, and they're getting ready to lose the rest of it. This is a problem. And you say, what do we do about it? You know what? I have a lot of libertarian friends out there that would say it is what it is. That we can't throw more problems at it. But this is a humanitarian issue. Here's the world. If you look at the world, we've got about 7 countries right now that have already had pilot programs on cryptocurrency that they are currently using in their country. China, Ukraine, Sweden, South Korea, Cambodia, Thailand, even Uruguay over here, little green spot. And there's 18 countries out there right now that are in research and development. The US, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Norway, Iran, Israel, Japan, Australia, Tasmania, Canada, Venezuela, Brazil, Iceland, UK, France, Netherlands, Denmark. I even forgot the 3rd smallest country in the world. It's only a few acres. It's called Liberland. They're building their whole government setup, infrastructure on the EOS.IO platform because it's the fastest and the best out there in crypto right now. A lot of people said, is this a crypto thing going to be the future or what? It's not going to be the future. It's here today. They're getting it set up right now. This is where we're going. The question isn't whether or not we're going to be there. The question is, are we going to stay free? Is it going to be centralized where government controls the currency, which means it controls the people? Or is it going to be decentralized? I don't know about you, but I like being free. And you say, well, government would never punish us. They're already doing it. Any country that doesn't obey us, we put sanctions on them. The SWIFT program means that when the U.S. is the world currency, countries trade with other countries have to go through the SWIFT program, which is the U.S. dollar. And all we do is hit a button and we shut off their money. You don't think they'll do it to you and me? Kurt, you're a Christian, you're an enemy of the state. You can't drive your car. You can't feed your family. Or we'll let you drive your car because you're only going to be able to use gas stations within a mile of your house. That should limit you to about 400 miles. I don't want government control. So a lot of people right now are currently working on a currency that will keep us free. A decentralized, truly decentralized. And I believe that there's people in Washington now working on it. So let's talk a little bit more about this. How are we doing for time? Oh, I'm going to hurry. So what's going on in the world right now? Well, the world's been battling back and forth over globalization versus national. And I'll tell you, I don't want a group of people in the United Nations telling me how to raise my kids. I don't want my neighborhood telling me how to raise my kids. I only want my neighborhood to help me with things that I can't do on my own. If I live in a small area and there's a few of us neighbors and the wolves are coming in and killing our livestock at night, we might have to post somebody through the night to watch the livestock for everybody because I can't do it 24/7. You know, I might need to have my school teachers out there teaching my kids because I can't be good at everything. I can't be a builder, a farmer, a school teacher, a doctor. We got to have a division of labor. So maybe we'll work as a society. And maybe what we'll do is we'll have our city take care of the sanitation and the trash. Maybe what we'll do as a county, we'll have other responsibilities, and as a state, other responsibilities. And the state should never do for the cities what they can't do for themselves. And the federal government was designed to help us with trade and to defend our borders. That was it. It wasn't to tell me what I do with my kids in my home. The last administration that was in under the Obama administration, they had the United Nations came in 16 times in 8 years. And they found they were looking for crimes against humanity in the United States of America. We're the one footing the bill to keep the most of the bill to keep these guys in running. And they said things like your Second Amendment rights. You know, the right to protect ourselves against tyranny of our government. They told us that lowering our taxes. You know, taxes are so high now that every family's got to have man, woman, child, dog, guinea pig. Everybody's got to work. And it's a crime against humanity to try to have our income taxes lowered. I don't need a group of people to tell me how to run my family. So there was a battle over this battle's been going on for a long time. It started over in Brexit over there, where the UK says, I don't want to be part of you guys no more. We want to be on our own. We can't control our borders. We're being taxed to death. We've lost our freedom. And they voted something called Brexit, which really should have been named Hotel California. Because even though they checked out, they were never going to leave. They finally let them leave not too long ago. It took years. Then we had a presidential election. Both sides of the aisle hated the guy that was coming in office. And I started asking questions. Why does everybody hate this guy? Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the Federal Reserve right now. The Federal Reserve has 7 governors on the Federal Reserve. They are basically in charge of the monetary structure of the world because the U.S. is the reserve currency for the world. 7 people control the money supply of the world. Talk about power. The Fed chairs over the years, since some of the span that I talked about, We had Greenspan from 87 to 06, Ben Bernanke from 06 to 14, Janet Yellen got in there from 14 to 18. Jerome Powell was just nominated in 2018, although he was already on the Fed back in 2012. They just moved him to Fed chair. Trump moved him to Fed chair. Trump put in Richard Clarida and Randy Quarles, is that how you say it? And Mickey Bowman. And so Trump's put in 4 out of the 7 people. Lael Brainerd was put in by Obama. So there's 2 more Fed chairs that need to come in. Well, if you look at what does Trump believe when it comes to the currency supply, he knows it's a problem. He's printing money too. He's for more currency supply, but I believe that there's something going on in the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve right now to go back to a hard currency of some sort. Let me explain. 2 nominees that Trump tried to put in, a guy by the name of Steve Moore. He was quoted saying, "Is the Fed really needed?" See, our forefathers said they did not want a central bank. They knew central banks destroy countries. By the way, anytime we went in to take over, whether it was Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, one of the first things we did is put a central bank in there. They put a central bank. So now what they're doing is you got Herman Cain was another one that was picked. The president nominates him, but the Senate has to appoint him. And the Senate shot these guys down. Herman Cain says gold is kryptonite to big spending politicians. Why do you think these politicians are shooting them down? Why do you think both sides of the aisle don't like them? The president now has got another one that he's trying to put in. Her name is Judy Shelton. She says she likes the idea of gold-backed currency, adding it could even be done in a cryptocurrency sort of way. She said gold is better than the mess we're in today. Trump just called gold standard wonderful. So keep in mind what true money is. Let's get into what's going on with the Treasury Department. I'm going to run through this fast because I told you about an hour and we're about 5 minutes away. Treasury Department, Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin. So BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager. They're managing about 29% of the U.S. debt today. In June of 2018, BlackRock with Coinbase. Coinbase is an exchange that takes fiat currency and exchanges with cryptocurrency or altcoins, which are other coins outside of like Bitcoin. So they were exploring the crypto ETFs, what are similar to mutual funds, except for they're traded all day long. September 2018, Brian Brooks is Coinbase's new CLO. He's the chief legal officer. He is a guy that's been heavy into the cryptocurrency. He's been big. He's the wizard of developing a stable coin, a coin that is backed by something that doesn't fluctuate too drastic. Crypto right now is too volatile. In May of 2019, Coinbase tries to acquire a Fed banking license. They're trying to become a bank. That is a no-no. That is a no-no. You do not try to take the power away from the banks. They have the ability to print as much currency as they want and devalue the wealth. How dare you come in? And a judge in New York, federal judge in New York said no, shot it down in a ball of flames. A couple months later, July of the same year, the CEO, Larry Fink, he is the CEO of BlackRock, said we're setting up a group to evaluate cryptocurrency. 3 months later, the group leader of that group, a guy named Robert Mitchnick, said crypto has made a huge development in technology and arrived at a fundamental value for Bitcoin. Their prediction of today's value is somewhere between $13,600 and $28,100 in today's dollars. Okay, 5 months later, Brian Brooks again. Here we go again. He said that Coinbase's plan was to be like the New York Stock Exchange, but to exchange different types of crypto. Later on that month, he announced that he was joining the Treasury Department of the United States of America to join his friend Steve Mnuchin in the Treasury Department. A crypto guy? The following month, his office appealed the federal judge in New York's ruling. And they're saying you have no jurisdiction for the whole country. And now they're duking that out right now. And here we are, May of 2020. They just announced that the head comptroller, it's supposed to say comptroller, of currency of the U.S. is stepping down, and Brian Brooks, the stablecoin wizard, is going to be the main acting comptroller of currency for the United States of America. The Treasury Department, in charge of making dies and printing and doing all the things, taking in taxation, dealing with all the currency within our country. Brian Brooks was quoted saying, private sector should build U.S. digital dollar. I kind of like the idea of a guy that comes from where we come from, and hopefully will push for a more decentralized currency. And so once again, looking at what's happening in the U.S., now you know why that's orange as well. Here's another thing that's just happened. This is as of March 26th. So the commercial banks hold their currency in the central banks. And commercial banks do not have to have any reserves if they loan out under $16.7 million in loans. After that, they move to 3% they have to have in reserves until 127.5 million in loans. After 127.5 million that they lend out, they have to keep 10% of reserves on hand. So what is that known as? You guys are familiar. You've heard Orrin Woodward, a bunch of people talk about this, called fractional reserve banking. That means that banks could lend out, hold on to only a tenth. They got the other 90% that they're lending out. As they lend that out, do you think those people are going to spend that money right away? No, they're going to put it back into bank accounts. And as they put it back in the bank double dips. And now they can go tenfold on that. And they're compounding. Banks could make a couple 100% on their money. As of March 26, 2020, just a couple months ago, the Fed said now that the currency that has to be in reserves is zero. If you look at the map down below, it's never been zero. The currency that has been held has gone up slightly here and there. And then after what happened in 2008, the reserves that the banks had to keep in, their fractional reserve, it went ballistic until 2 months ago. It dropped all the way down to zero. Yeah, that is a blue line on the edge of the black line. Banks no longer have to keep any cash on hand. As of last month, 0% vault cash needed to satisfy required reserves. Basically, unlimited currency creation by the banks. And the question is, if they don't have to keep the money in hand when you want it, will it be there? And so going back to Mike Maloney's 7 Stages of Empire, let's talk about 6 again, loss of faith in currency. I do believe we have arrived. The loss of purchasing power of the expanded currency supply is sensed by the population and the financial markets, triggering a loss of faith in the currency. And then number 7, And I believe we're heading right into this one now. Currency crisis. Gold accounts for fiat currency. A mass movement out of the currency into precious metals and other tangible assets takes place. The currency collapse and gold and silver rise in price as they account for a humongous quantity of currency that has been created and is still going through the. They are printing so many receipts. It is laughable. This process transferred massive wealth to those who had the foresight to position themselves beforehand into real money. Gold, silver, and some believe crypto. I told you at the beginning I will never tell anybody what to do or suggest for them to do, but what I will tell you is what I'm doing. And I've been doing this for the last 11 years or so. I've put my money into physical gold and silver, and there's a lot of vaults that you can have access to. A lot of great companies out there that do it. I'm not going to suggest any off the top of on this call. I encourage you all to go do your own homework and keep it safe. I also have money in mining stocks. There's some great mining companies that have skeleton crews over the years and have stayed alive in spite of everything that's happened, that are getting ready to just go ballistic. There's a lot of great cryptocurrencies out there. I know you guys have heard of Bitcoin, but there's a lot of altcoins that I believe will be even better. Warren Buffett always made fun of gold and silver because it didn't pay dividends. It just sat there. But that's what Bitcoin is. It's like the gold of the crypto. It just sits there. My views in altcoins is I put my money into up-and-coming companies, and I've been paid dividends over the last couple of years, quite a bit of dividends in the cryptocurrency arena already. And then the fourth one is another income source. We are going to go into some really tough times, and you got to take care of yourself. And I would encourage you all to dig your well before you get thirsty. Get other business income sources. I did that for myself back in 1992, going into a recession. I got my freedom in 1995 because I was done playing the game. Today, the company that I am involved with has evolved over the years, and we launched a brand new part of it in 2011 called Life, and we have a super app. It has proven already to be pandemic proof. Our business has exploded the last few months. But one thing I do know for sure is my business in the last 28 years, going through 4 recessions, my business does good when times are good, and when times are bad in recessions and depressions, my business explodes because we have something that people want and need. They want to save money and they want to make money, and they want to do it the cheapest way they can. And this one's $30 a month. So I would encourage you to get back with the person that invited